Hello everybody, welcome to this beginner focused video. It's something I've been meaning to do for quite some time, to record a video talking through all of the things that you need to begin to know when you just start out, because I feel like there's a lot of information out there and it can get very daunting. So I want to make one video that covers everything that I wish I knew when I just started out. So yeah, there's quite a few topics I want to be covering, from brands of clay to conditioning, beginner tools, intermediate tools, cutters, baking, finishing, and presentation. So as you can tell, it's the full life cycle from beginning to end with working with clay. Whether you'll be making earrings, whether you're going to be making wall hangings or sculptures or miniatures, or doesn't matter, this information is very valuable for anybody that is just starting out in this beautiful hobby. So first off, I want to talk about the different brands. So I have four, technically five in my opinion, brands that is sitting here in front of me. Each one of them have a different price tag. Each one of them have different behavior. I have worked with a few brands that isn't on my desk right now, but I don't have them left anymore. So yeah, I can talk to the experience of them, but I can't show you exactly what I mean in terms of what they look and feel like. So talking from right to left here, it is definitely going in a sense of favoritism if we swap them around like that. So Clayology. It is a very controversial brand because, first of all, it's very cheap in comparison to Sculpey and Fimo Professional, Cernet and the like. It is very, very affordable. A lot of people is having a great time with it. A lot of people hate working with it. I've heard complaints from some people not being able to handle the smell of this clay, versus some people not liking the finish of this clay, versus some people having really bad experiences with color consistency in this brand. I've even seen a lady once that she bought a block of green and it looked like there was specks in the clay, maybe of color that hasn't been worked in or something like that and gotten hard. I don't know. But when she bakes it, those specks didn't go away, or if she conditioned it, it didn't go away. But like I said, controversial brand, this one. Personally, I don't like it because of how bendy it is when it's finished. So to prove my point, I've cut out some pieces of every brand. I'm just going to quickly lay them out here so that they're easy to access. I've also underbaked and overbaked some pieces, so yeah. Okay, so this is how bendy Clayology is. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this piece. It's honestly like rubber. You can roll this up and the thickness doesn't make a difference to that bendiness. You can make it as thick as you want, it remains bendy. I've bent it so much you can see there's some damage on the surface. But yeah, this is how bendy it is. So you'll see now with the rest of the brands, they aren't this bendy. Then Fimo Professional. A lot of people do like Fimo Professional. It's, in my opinion, a very hard clay. So if you have trouble with your hands or struggle to do pressure or something like that, I do recommend getting what they call an auger press to work with this clay in order to help you condition it, because once it starts getting conditioned, it is fairly okay to work with. It's not difficult to work with it. It's just getting it conditioned is a lot of hard work. The finish on this clay is a little bit shiny, and as you can see, it's not as bendy as Clayology, but still flexible, which means that it's strong. It is a very good clay to work with. It is certainly more readily available than Cernet and Sculpey. By all means, you'll be able to find Fimo at a lot of places, from B&A to Art Savings Club, and also in a lot of different colors. You never struggle to find colors in Fimo. If they're out of white, you just wait a few weeks, it'll come in. Whereas with Sculpey, we pray. Then next up, Cernit. So Cernit has two lines. The one that I have here is Opaline, which at the time that I bought this, I needed white. So I bought the white Opaline and hope that it's going to work great, which I'm a little bit disappointed, but I was expecting to be disappointed, because the Opaline range is what they call 50% translucent. So as you can see on this white, it's not perfect white because it is semi-translucent. It is a fairly hard finish in the end product. It's not quite as shiny as what professional could be. So I really like this clay in terms of how it looks and how it behaves. It is, I would say, as hard to condition as Fimo Professional, but with this one, your external temperature has a massive impact. So Fimo Professional, I've carried it around in my pocket and it just does nothing. It doesn't do nothing to this clay. Whereas with Cernit, if I carry it around in my pocket for the day and then work with it in the evening, it is very soft, very pliable, very easy to condition. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Then my two favorites. So I am very much a Sculpey fangirl. I am not going to sugarcoat this, so take this bias from where it comes. The reason why I am a fangirl is because Sculpey is exceptionally consistent. Their color is very difficult to mess up, to overbake. It's very easy to work with this clay. It's easy to condition. It's a dream to work with. The only thing that's hard with Sculpey is to get it because there's 3 suppliers in South Africa, and if they don't have the color you want, sorry. Sculpey doesn't allow you to import from them directly, so getting colors is a bit of a mess. So there's 2 lines that I really enjoy, which is the Primo and the Souffle line. Primo has a little bit more of a shiny finish, while Souffle has a little bit more of a matte finish, because with Souffle they put what they call microbeads in, which also affects the weight of this clay. So as you can see, these 2 blocks, it actually looks as if the Souffle is a little bit bigger than Primo, but they're actually similarly sized. But this one is 48.2 grams, whilst this one is 57 grams. And it is, the weight difference is literally just because of the microbeads. There isn't less clay in this block than in this block. It's the same amount of clay, which I personally really like because I make stitch markers, so the weight does have an impact on how it works and behaves for me personally. So in terms of finish, this is a mixed color. This is not this color, just before you think I overbaked it. But as you can see, it's not quite as shiny as Fimo Professional, the Primo one, that is. So if I can just flash them together, it's not quite as shiny, and I know this is a darker color, so it's going to reflect more. But yeah, the Souffle look has this extremely matte look, and the feel of it is also very different. So the feel of Primo is extremely smooth and my mother would say plasticky, whereas Souffle's feel is what they call a suede finish. So it feels, in my opinion, extremely biased opinion, more luxurious. Both of them is a very strong clay, very durable and exceptional to work with. Souffle does behave differently when you work with it. I find that it handles heat better. I can't explain it, but with other clays, the more you work with it, especially in the South African climate, the more you work with it, the more sticky it gets. Whereas with Souffle, that doesn't tend to happen. Souffle just stays its beautiful, gorgeous self. I did make a thicker piece of the Sculpey as well, just to show the small amount of bend that it has in comparison to Clayology. Just to highlight that, because I do find that the consistent thing with Clayology, whether you enjoy it or not, it is very bendy. And if you try to reach out to them and tell them, listen, your clay is extremely bendy, they tell you you didn't bake it right. and I absolutely baked it right. It's not my fault. So now I'll talk about underbaking and overbaking in a moment, when I actually get to baking. I think that would be a better category for it. Cool. So that's for brands. Now for conditioning. So let me just get this out of the way. So with polymer clay, there is a phenomena that they call aging of the clay, because what this medium actually is a coloring kind of thing, and then plasticizers and polymers and a base of things. So the plasticizer specifically can evaporate over time. So depending on how you store your clay, you could have a situation where your clay becomes crumbly. Even if you buy a package that has been sealed completely, never been opened, but it's from like 2015, 2018, it will also be a little bit harder to work with and potentially crumbly. So just to show you guys what that looked like, because I love this color, but this one is an old block. If I remember right, its manufacturing date was 2015 when I bought it in 2020. But yeah, so as you can see, it is extremely hard to work with and very easy to pull apart. And if you try to press it and force it, it crumbles very easily. So you might ask what to do with this clay. Simple answer is to condition it as much as you can. Small pieces at a time. Keep playing with it in your fingers and adding heat to it. What you can also do is to add a drop of liquid clay. So I usually use Sculpey's clear or transparent liquid clay. And when I say a drop, I mean for a block like this, you're probably going to need about that much. Maybe even less. So once the liquid clay is on there, it becomes a bit messy to work with it. But you'll see as you work it in, it almost instantly becomes softer and easier to work with. And the color also tend to come off. This is just because of the transparent liquid clay that I've added. It picks up the color particles within this clay and then just comes onto my fingers. It's perfectly normal. This is also a very rich color, very rich in pigment, so you can expect that to happen more readily. So as you can see, as I'm working with it now, it's becoming a lot softer and more pliable. If I press it, you can see now it's less crumbly, less prone to breaking, but this piece still has to go a little bit. So as you're working with it, you'll just see that it becomes better and better. Another way you can condition your clay is to put it through your pasta machine off the bat. If you are lucky enough to be able to purchase a pasta machine when you just start out. So something very important to remember with that is that your pasta machine can't handle extremely thick pieces right off the bat. So what I usually do is to cut them smaller or to squish them so that they're just about the size of the pasta machine width that I'm going to be putting it through. So I'm going to bring you over to my pasta machine now. Whoop. Sorry for that. So you literally just put it through your pasta machine, fold it, put it through again, and you keep doing that until you feel that your clay is conditioned. So a lot of people will tell you that once you fold it and you press it down, if it doesn't crack, it's conditioned enough. I have since learned that's actually a myth. So some clays will continue to crack while still being perfectly conditioned. Ah, sorry, my boy, I dropped my clay on you. I'm so sorry. Whilst others will, so you see there, it's cracked now, but if I press it down with my fingers, because it's slower, it doesn't crack. If I put it up through a pasta machine, no cracking. But if I fold it, don't press it down through the pasta machine, then it cracks. But this piece is now conditioned. Bring you guys over here again. You'll start seeing as you're working with clay that there is a point where it becomes too sticky to work with. Once that happens, all you do, set it down, leave it for 5 minutes. It'll come back to itself. Sometimes it's to do with the heat. Sometimes it's to do with how much it's been moved around that it becomes so sticky. It also becomes soft if you mess with it too much, which makes it difficult to work with. I'm just going to make this piece a little bit thinner for my next part I want to be talking about. But yeah, so that's it about conditioning. If you condition with a roller, what you can do is just fold the clay over and roll it down. It's really not extremely difficult to do. What is important though is to be mindful of bubbles when you do that. So as you can see here, I'm pressing it from the side down, and then you can just roll it down with your roller, fold it over, roll it down again. If your clay is harder than what this one is, where it doesn't want to work with you, then by all means you can push it with your thumb, or you can get an arbor press, or you can get your husband to play with it. There's many a way to skin a cat. Okay. Then next up, beginner tools. So this is one of those areas of expertise that a lot of people is very biased in terms of what they consider to be a beginner tool and what they consider to be not a beginner tool. So my personal beginner tool list is extremely short. It's 4 things. A roller. It can be an acrylic roller like this. It can be one of those white plastic rollers. It can be a stainless steel roller. It doesn't matter. As long as you can roll your clay and get a smooth surface off of it and it doesn't stick too much to your roller, it's perfectly fine. Then something else I do recommend for a beginner is depth guides of some description. So I bought these from Printed yonks ago. So there's a 3mm one and a 2mm one. And what you do with it is that you literally just lay it down next to your clay, take your roller, and then roll it over your clay. Whoops, sorry for that noise. Until your roller doesn't go down any further. So what the depth guides essentially do is just stops your roller from going down further than what the depth guides want you to go. So those were now the 3mm ones. So now I can go down even further to a 2mm one. And that's it. If you don't have access to these depth guides, I believe Victoria Creative sells them as well as Printed. I'm not sure whether Printed still sells them actually. I'll have a look and put a link here if they do. But if you don't have access to these depth guides, what you can also do is to use playing cards or cardboard or any mechanism that you can create something that has a very specific height that cannot be squashed down further than what you want it to be going. Okay, and then third on the list is a scalpel. Mine is battle worn and tested. I've been using this bad boy since 2020. I've replaced the blade, I've picked clay off of it, it's been in the oven one time, but it is absolutely indispensable. Not only can you do texturing with it, but I use it very often to pop bubbles. You basically just see if there is a bubble on your surface, you press it with a pin and you just press it around in order to press the air out of that space. You can also use it for hand cut techniques where you just cut out a shape, whatever shape you want, out of the clay and bake that. If you don't have access to cutters, this is a very inexpensive way to get different kinds of shapes. You can also use a scalpel or a tissue blade, which is next on the list actually. You can use those to cut different shapes, even beyond what you have. So if you have a circle, you can cut it in half, get a semicircle. So yeah, those are options available to you. Then the other things that's very important is tissue blades. So you get two kinds. One is a more rigid type, like this DAS one. You won't say it's DAS, but it's DAS. I've already wiped off the logo. I've cleaned it so much. So this DAS one, which is a more rigid blade. So as you can see, it doesn't flex too much. I use this one typically to cut canes or such, because it's, as it goes through the clay, it's very difficult to flex this blade. It stays rigid, which is why it's called the rigid one. Then you get the more flexible ones. You've got this one is from Sculpey. It comes in a 3-pack with these two, and then a third one that's a wavy one that I don't know where it is right now. So this one is more rigid, but it is it's less rigid than the dust blade, which is why I use this one for nearly everything except cutting canes. And then you have this one, which is extremely flexible. So with this one, it's very easy to pick up pieces once you've cut them out. If I can quickly show you guys. If you've got your piece of clay here, you've got your shape, cut it, lift it. So important when lifting stuff is keep that edge of the blade on your tile, and then as you're working towards your shape, jiggle it a little bit back and forth so that your shape doesn't end up sticking to the blade. And as you can see, no distortion, came up very easily, no issues. Yeah, that's it for the beginner tools. Next up, we've got intermediate tools. So these are the tools that I would get once you've started making a few pieces and you want to expand your techniques and the things that you get involved with and what you can do, and to try and find your niche, as they call it. So first up is ball tools. This one is the one I started with, which is a nail art ball tool from Essence that has a very thin side and then a bigger side, which I had on hand. I used it for nail art before I did clay. And yeah, you also get specialist ball tools. So you've got this set from Sculpey, which comes with 3 ball sides and then silicone tools at the back. I'll get to silicone tools in a moment. The silicone tools on these are not great. In fact, if I can go back in time and tell past cut trader something, it would be don't buy this set. Because the silicone tools have stripes on them, and to get them to have a smooth look is very difficult. I've tried cutting them, I've tried sanding them, I've tried everything to try and smooth them out. As you can see how I've mutilated this tip. Nothing works for me. So I would not recommend this set. The set I would recommend is this. So this is a cheaper one actually. It is just a metal shaft with 2 ball tools on either side. But first of all, you get a bigger variety in terms of ball tools. Second of all, because it's got this rubber grip in the middle, I find it a lot more comfortable to work with this tool over the Sculpey set. So this is what you would typically be using for your floral techniques when you have to squish things in your hands, or if you want to do mukumigane or texturing to press into the clay. And yeah, then there's needle tools. So when I just started out, and I've shown this on my floral techniques one, I took a sewing needle that I lashed onto a knitting double-sided knitting pin. So this is all it is, and I used this one for months until I bought the Sculpey one, which I really enjoy. This also came with a set of tools, I believe, but this needle tool is the reason why I bought the set, and it is fantastic. I'm really enjoying this particular tool. Then last thing is silicone tools. So you get a lot of different variety in terms of silicone tools. I'm just grabbing a few here out of my container. You get these types of silicone tools, which comes in a whole big set of different shapes from Green Stuff World, and their tips are perfectly molded. They are perfectly shaped. There's no lines, there's no funny business, there's no bippies that's sticking out or nothing. The black set is a little bit more rigid than the white set, so I would recommend this if you want to get silicone tools. You also get cheaper ones, which I think it's meant for nail art. But I've seen these types of sets in quite a few places. You get 5 of them with different colored diamonds in the inside. These are extremely bendy and soft, but they are good quality tips. So I would recommend getting these as well. So what do you use these for, you may ask? There's quite a few things you can use them for. Most often what they're used for is to blend things into each other. So if you have a piece of clay on top of another piece, you use it to blend that piece when you are doing sculpting, so that you don't see that seam anymore. It's easier to blend with a silicone tool than with something like your finger. I'm not too experienced with that technique myself, simply because I don't do a lot of sculpting. What I do use them for is when I've cut out a shape, I take the pointy ones and I run around the edges of my shapes in order to finish them off a little bit better, so that I don't have to do so much sanding. That's if I'm not lazy. Cool. So that's it for tools. So next, what I want to talk about is cutters. Now, this might be a very contended topic, because there's a lot of people out there that make their living with their cutters, and there is such a thing as a good cutter and a bad cutter. There's no such thing as all cutters are equal. So what I do want to do is to empower you to make the decision about what type of cutter you want, without having to feel disappointed in what you ended up buying. So I'm going to be talking firstly about, maybe let's cover bad quality cutters. So I have a few of them. You end up buying them thinking that, oh, maybe they will work, but then they don't. So one of the worst kind of cutters you can buy is stuff that is meant as cookie cutters. So this type of cutter, these plunger cutters, if you look at their edges, especially this kind of one, you can see that it's very flat. It isn't really sharp. So what will happen when you press down into clay is that that flat area will end up mushing clay down and making the edge very messy. So you see here how much clay residue was left behind. It's not quite so much on this one now because I pressed quite hard, but if you don't press very hard with these cutters, oh, you can see there on the inside much better. So sometimes this residue ends up on your piece, not on the remainder of the piece, but you can also see how much it distorted the clay around where the shape was cut out. Another variety is this grit kind of variety. I thought this particular one, very great idea, trash idea. Because as you're cutting out your shape here, this clay that's on the edge, it needs to go somewhere. So where will it go? Into your other shapes. So the shapes that you end up getting from this type of cutter is not as perfect as it would be from an individual cutter, even an individual cutter with a bad edge like this one. Then you have this one, which if you look at the edge, it looks fairly sharp. But if you actually like look down on the cutter, you see it goes thick very fast. So what ends up with this kind of thing is that it just shoves the clay every which direction. Your shapes never come out beautiful. It's a bad time. Okay, so now that we've spoken about the bad cutters, let's talk about the good cutters. So in my opinion, the best type of cutter is a 3D printed cutter. You get quite a few suppliers for them. It almost feels like these days anybody with a 3D printer wants to sell 3D printed cutters. There is a few things to take in consideration with the design of these cutters, which makes them a good or a bad cutter. So first of all, it shouldn't have a hard step. So I don't have cutters with a hard step, but I'm going to show you what it looks like if you don't have a hard step. So this is one from Printed, and this is one from Claycat. So as you can see with Printed, there is a slope on the edge of the cutter before it reaches the wall that goes all the way up to the top. The slope is quite quick, which is perfectly fine because there isn't a hard step. With Claycat's cutters, that slope is a little bit more gentle, which means that it remains a bit sharper in the front than what it would be with Printed cutters. But again, neither of these are necessarily wrong. It is just their own personal choice in how they would want to design their cutters. I haven't bought from Victoria Creative yet, but I've heard people say that her cutters is also great. And I can see on the photos that she doesn't have a hard step on them either. The other thing that makes a 3D printed cutter great is the cutting edge. So on both of these, you can see the cutting edge is very thin. It's almost equally thin in terms of right in front. The only difference is that Printed's cutters goes thicker, faster. That's the only difference between these two, in my opinion, which would have an impact in how it moves the clay if you work with thicker pieces. So if you want to make smaller shapes and cut out several of them in a row, the Printed cutter will shift your clay a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't make the cutter a bad cutter. It's simply a different cutter. You do get 3D printers that they have blunt, thick edges. They sometimes advertise their cutters by only showing the back like this, never the cutting edge, because they know they have a step or that the cutting edge is not thin. And if you can't see the cutting edge, don't buy from that supplier. That's my best piece of advice I can give you. If you don't see a cutting edge, don't buy. So yeah, that's it for 3D printed cutters. Now for how to use them. So one of the things that I like doing when I was just starting out, because it's very hard to tell whether the entire edge have reached the bottom of your tile when you're cutting, is to make use of a acrylic board. So you can get these from nearly any craft supplies store. I got these from Country Craft and Stamps. I've got quite a lot of shapes and sizes and things, and as you can see, I use them a lot. So then in terms of releasing, what you can use is a bit of cornstarch. So I usually just gently dip the cutter in, gently tap it on a towel just to get the excess off, so that you have a small amount of cornstarch left. Lay it on your piece where you want to cut, then use your acrylic tile to exert even pressure everywhere on your cutter. This way, because you've got a bigger space that you're pressing down on, first of all, you don't have to apply as much pressure to get to go down as what you would if you were to press with your fingertips like this only. But second of all, because it's an even space that you're pressing down on, it's not just one edge of the cutter, you can be sure that this cutter, as it's sitting right here, the entire cutting edge has made contact with the tile and it's all the way down. When you lift it up, try and lift it as evenly by making as many contact points as what you can with your cutter. A lot of people say jiggle your cutter. I say don't jiggle your cutter. Try and keep it stable, because if you jiggle it, you're going to distort the shape. So as you can see now, this cut is extremely sharp, extremely little, very little distortion on the clay around, almost no distortion on the clay on the inside. You can basically just see on the edge where it dents in a little bit, where the cutter was starting to go down, which is perfectly normal. What you can do at this point is take a soft, bigger brush and just brush off your cornstarch. Then lift your skeleton and there's your piece. So now you can take a tissue blade. I'm just going to move this out of the way and jiggle it forward, and there's your piece, perfect and beautiful. This gives a good opportunity to show you guys. So what I do with these silicone tools is I just go over the edge. You can do it with your finger, but I find that if you do it with your finger, all of these little bippies that want to keep living their lives on your clay, you squish them into the clay, and then you don't have as smooth of a finish. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you get used to this perfectly, then you can have a beautiful edge. Here you go. So yeah, that's it for cutters. Oh, you can also use water to release your cutters a little bit easier. Just be mindful with certain brands, and I think it's Das, I'm not sure, it might be Das or Fima, but the water makes the clay very soft. So if you use water as a release agent, just be mindful of that phenomena. Cool. So now for baking. First of all, let's talk about underbaking. So I've marked this one because I put it into the oven for a full 20 minutes, so it's definitely underbaked. So these 3 hearts was cut from the same piece of clay at the same time. The only difference between them is how long and how hot I baked them. These 2 were baked at 130 degrees as prescribed by Sculpey. You can see it on their packaging. They just have the American Fahrenheit. Where is it? There we go. There it is. They added the Celsius. So 130 degrees Celsius. So these were baked at 130 degrees. This one was baked for 20 minutes. This one was baked for an hour. So the hour one, you can see, is very strong. It doesn't want to snap. Even if I force it to touch, it starts to tear, as you can see there, but it doesn't break. This one, however, because it's just been baking for 20 minutes, when I push it, it's not so much underbaked apparently. Apparently 20 minutes is enough. There you can see it's starting to happen. But what underbaked usually looks like is when you do this, it literally just snaps. Yeah, but as you can see, this one is definitely not as strong as what this one is. You can already see there is quite a difference. If you find your pieces are underbaked, if you try to bend them and they break, you can absolutely just put them back in the oven for an extra 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever. When it comes to baking polymer, you can bake it at the right temperature for the entire day and it won't burn, because burning only happens at a specific higher temperature. So this one I put back into the oven for 40 minutes at 160 degrees. And this is how it came out, where it is burnt. This one will also be a little bit more stiff because of the burntness of it, which means that if it was burnt more, it would become more and more brittle. So if you were to drop it, it would be liable to break, discoloration aside. So now the question is, how do you know that you're baking your stuff correctly? Very simple and straightforward answer. You use the oven thermometer. So this one is my favorite one. I got it from my gran. She used to bake with it. I used to bake with it. It works fantastic. It's very old, but it works fantastic. So as you can see, we baked real food with it. You stick this into the oven with your clay. So as your clay is sitting on your oven pan, you literally just stick this in with it. Your needle will show you what is the real temperature inside of the oven, so that you never have to guess what the temperature is. Very, very important to understand is that ovens don't measure their temperature with a thermometer that's inside of the oven. They measure it with a spring mechanism that's actually sitting closer to the knob that you adjust your temperature with. So how that spring mechanism works is, as the oven gets hotter and hotter, the surrounding air also gets hotter, which you can feel if you feel the counter around the oven. It feels hotter. At some point, that heat would make a spring that's closer to the knob close, which will mean that it will cut off the electricity to the oven, which will then stop heating up. As soon as it cools down enough for that spring to open again, it turns back the electricity, and so it regulates by constantly turning electricity on and off, on and off, on and off the whole time. So if you have external factors, such as the weather outside is hotter today than what it was yesterday, it means that your oven internal is going to bake hotter than what you think it would. So it's very important to always, always, always bake with a thermometer inside of your oven. Whether you are baking with a convection oven, whether you're baking with a countertop oven, whether you're baking with a in-house built-in oven, it doesn't matter. Always use a thermometer because your oven knob lies. There's also the phenomena around moving air inside of your oven, as well as hot pockets. So with some ovens, what ends up happening is that spring mechanism struggles to regulate itself if you don't have a fan that's moving air inside of the oven, forcing that heat to actually reach that spring. I have this problem with my own oven actually, where if I bake with it without the fan on, it bakes far hotter than what it does with the fan off. It bakes far hotter with the fan off than what it does with it on. If the fan's on, it's fairly close to what the knob said it should be, but if the fan's off, you can't. It is impossible to regulate. It keeps bouncing up and down. I can't use it without the fan. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And then the last thing is, when you bake your pieces, there's a lot of advice that goes around baking on a tile versus baking on a piece of paper in a baking pan versus tenting versus using one of those disposable aluminium takeaway containers over your clay, all these kind of things. All of those things are assistants to regulating the temperature. If you pay attention to your thermometer and you actually know what's going on inside of your oven, you don't need a lot of these things. So clay tiles would typically be used to regulate the temperature downwards, whilst tenting them, their pieces tend to distribute the heat better so that there isn't hot spots. So I'm a big advocate for tenting your work when you just start out until you start to get to know your oven. At the moment, I know my oven so well that I don't tent my work, I don't use tiles, I just stick it into the oven, same temperature every time. But I'm also lucky enough to have a dedicated oven. If you bake on paper, you'll also see that the butt end of your clay would have a matte finish, such as what this one does have. If you bake on a tile, you'll see that there's shiny spots that's on the surface. You can take those shiny spots off with a bit of acetone or non-acetone nail polish remover if you're scared of acetone. Um, so yeah, there is a way to deal with them. But if you just use a piece of paper underneath your clay pieces, it eliminates having to do that. It's just an extra step you don't have to do. Cool. So now finishing. A lot of people will tell you that you need to buy a Dremel in order to make earrings, and it is an outright lie. Making earrings without a Dremel is a little bit more difficult, but you don't need a Dremel in order to make earrings. You can get away with using plain old-fashioned hand labor. So what I used in the beginning was what they call wet dry sandpaper. So this is a kit that I've got from Sculpey that's currently unused. But the important thing to notice is the grits. So with this kit, you get 2 pieces of 400 grit, which is a little bit rougher. Then you get 2 pieces of a 600 grit, which is finer. 2 pieces of an 800 grit, which is even finer. And then 2 pieces of 1000 grit, which is extremely fine. You can use this progression to sand your edges, but you can also use it to buff your pieces so that they become shiny if you want to. The 1000 grit one is enough to get it to a shiny point. I haven't tried it before, so I'm not going to do it. What I am going to show you is how to use this in order to buff your pieces. So I have done absolutely nothing to this heart. Let's just take the baked one, proper baked one. There we go. So as you can see, if I bring it a little bit closer, focus, there we go. The edge is quite rough. If you were to feel it with your finger, it feels sharp. So what you do is you put your piece of sanding paper down. You take your piece and you hold it so that that corner is against the edge, and then you just rub it, just like that. It will take off that sharp edge. The more you rub it, the more rounded it would become, and it would then end up making your finished piece feel smooth to the touch. You can also introduce water to this, so you can dip your piece in water and then rub it onto the sandpaper. I don't like doing that personally, just because I'm not one that likes mess. If you watch my faux stone video, you would know. Cool. So then on the corners, you can just use your sandpaper and work into that corner a little bit. Just the edge that you struggle to reach if you're just holding it flat. The holding it flat on a surface does mean that it goes a little bit faster than holding it in the air, but holding it in the air does give you a little bit of bending to go around corners. There we go. So now you can see the edges worked off. It doesn't have sharp edges, it feels smooth around, and this piece is pretty much finished. Cool. Now next question that you might want to ask is, what about holes? I recently got very great advice from a lady where she uses her scalpel to actually hold a small drill bit. So this drill bit is the smallest size of my Dremel kit, and I'm just going to twist my blade out here. The reason why I'm using my smallest one is because my Dremel drill bit, the next size up, is 1.6, and it doesn't fit inside of my scalpel. But there we go. You can just make your scalpel use or hold a tiny drill bit, and there you have it. You have a bin drill just like that. You can purchase small sized drill bits from any hardware store. I think the smallest that you can get is something like 2 millimeters. But yeah, this is a very great cost-effective solution in order to drill. Now, what you do in order to get it to drill is that you hold it against the surface of your clay and you just twist. Applying a little bit of pressure, you'll see the clay will start to twist out in little curlies, which is perfect. That is exactly what you want. And after some time, your drill bit will come through on the other side, which means that you can just pull it back. Twist it a bit if you want to make that hole a bit smoother, or if there's bippies that's left over on either side. And there you have it, a tiny little hole, perfect for a little jump ring. I would recommend using a bit bigger drill bit than what I'm using now. So just have a look how to fit it into your craft knife. I don't want to force the drill bit that I typically use for my holes because I'm scared of breaking it and it's precious. But yeah, that is a very interesting tip that I got, and it works. Just going to stick my crafting knife back in there. Cool. Something else you can also use is what in the industry, in the international crafting market, they call micro cutters. Here in South Africa, we call them good old bootlace ferrules because that's what they are. So how they look, let me just grab some. I don't have one lying around. Oh, there's one. What they look like is these things. So electrical engineers or electrical tradesmen use these to combine wires together. They stick it in on one end, crimp it, and then this side is conductive, as far as I understand. You can use these to make holes as well because they come in various sizes up to very, very small ones. Let me just grab some here. Here we go. So as you can see, they go really tiny. So you can use these to just punch out a hole while your clay is still raw. So if I can just quickly show you guys. Whoop. Obviously be more careful than what I am. If you get clay stuck into it, you can just use a needle tool to get it out. Simple as that. Here we go. Cool. Then you can just bake it like that if you don't want to be drilling holes. Some people like doing this in the beginning because drilling holes is definitely a learned skill in terms of where to put them and making them neat. And yeah, cool. That's it for drilling holes. And next up, I want to talk about bubbles and sealing. Cool. Okay, so to deal with bubbles it's a bit of a contended issue. So this one, as you can see if I flash it here, it's got a little bit of bubbles on the surface. There's some people that recommend acetone to take them off. So this is just plain old Planet Nails acetone. You take an ear buddy, put a little bit on there, and then work your bubble off. What acetone does though, and this is something you need to keep in mind, it will literally eat away the surface of your clay in order to make it smoother. So if your bubble is big, this method is not going to help you anything. The second effect of this method is that it changes the surface of your clay and what it looks like. So I'll show you in a second. Here we go. So now you can see the bubbles are certainly less pronounced. They're still there because I purposefully put deep bubbles in here. But the surface of the clay is now a lot more matte than what it was when we began. And that is simply because of the acetone having literally eaten away that top layer of the bubbles. So if your bubble is very big and you try this method, you are going to end up eating through the top level and then seeing the little gap of where the air pocket actually sits. That is a risk that you're taking with this method. Another method that I've heard people use is to bake with a tile on top. So essentially what that does is, if you don't have any surface 3D effects, if you bake with a tile on top, it keeps the clay down. Because what an air bubble is, the reason why it expands like that is, as the clay is curing in the oven, that air inside of the clay heats up. And with it heating up, it expands a little bit. The molecules goes further away from each other a little bit because it is a gas. And with that, it needs to shove the clay around it in some direction, which is usually towards the point of least resistance, which would be the top of your piece. So if you're baking with a tile on top, it means that pressure means that where they're trying to push the clay is more towards the sides, which is certainly less noticeable than on the top. Cool. Then sealing. As this clay stands right here in my hand, I don't have to seal this. To leave it like this, to sell it like this, it is perfectly fine. It's going to stay beautiful for the rest of its life. It's going to stay the same color. It's not going to like discolor. It's not going to flake. It's not going to be weird. It's not going to grow some sort of moss. It's going to stay like this, hopefully until the end of time. But you don't have to seal polymer clay for it to be beautiful. The only point in time where you have to use any kind of sealer on polymer clay is if you've used surface techniques or inclusions that could discolor or be affected. So stuff like silk screens, certain types of gold leaf, if it's not the plastic kind, if it's the actual metal kind, to stop that from oxidizing. All of these kind of things you need to seal, not for the sake of the polymer, but for the sake of the additive. So just keep that in mind when you design your pieces, because I see a lot of people have this misconception that you always have to seal everything, and it is absolutely not true. Righto, last thing on the books is presentation. So with presentation, here's a few things to keep in mind. When you're taking photos, you need to keep in mind your light source. If you're using natural light, you could have shadows that happens. So as you can see, my hands moving around here, I'm casting shadows because of the light that's coming from my window at the front. What I could do is use a piece of paper on this side in order to reflect the light that way and minimize the shadows. Actually, hang on. There we go. I can actually show it. So here I have a piece of plain white paper. So as you can see now, there's shadows. If I put my hand down, there's a stark shadow. Whereas I'm now bringing the piece of paper closer. See, there's a piece of paper in shot. And you can see the difference it makes to that harshness of the shadow. Literally all I'm doing is bringing in an additional piece of paper. That's all I'm doing. And it makes quite a big difference in how your piece will reflect light, how it will reflect your color into your lens of your camera. So making use of bounced light off of a white thing, it could be a piece of paper, board, whatever you have at hand, it helps a lot. Second thing is the time of day when you take photos. So morning and evening, not quite evening, like early afternoon, late afternoon, the light color is a little bit more yellow than what it is typically throughout the rest of the day. So where I'm at now, it's starting to become late evening, late afternoon. Yeah, English is hard, y'all. So the light is starting to turn a little bit more yellow, which you can probably see in terms of how the color looks on my video camera right now. Um, and with that yellowing, it will affect your colors. So if you take your photos more midday-ish, it means the light will be brighter, but you would get more true colors. So it comes down to what you value as a photographer. So the golden hour, which is early morning and late afternoon, it's great for taking photos because all of your shadows is more muted. It's more easy to handle your shadows. But it's terrible for artists because it throws your colors. So you need to find a balance in terms of when you take your photos to really find what works for you. Then something else I want to talk about is what you include in your photos, because I see a lot of ladies that take photos that's very busy because they're trying to adhere to this Instagram pretty kind of photos where they have a product, it's earrings or it's a sculpture or it's something, but there's so much else going on in the photo that when you look at just the photo, you don't know what the photo is of really. Because there's plants, there's baskets, there's like textiles in there, there's all sorts of other accessories. What are you taking a photo of? Your earrings or your side table, right? So be mindful of what you include in your shot. The general rule is less is more. If you want to showcase what you're selling, which would be your earrings or your product, right? Try to take photos of both just displaying your product in a beautiful and clean way, as well as your product actually in use. Because a lot of people struggle to fathom size or understand how it's going to look on them. So to include photos where it's actually on an ear or even just held next to your face with a stick, you get those clear sticks. They look like the depth guides, these things, but they have a hole drilled in the one side so you can put your earring on, which means that you can hold your earring next to your ear without actually putting it inside of your ear, which is a lot more sanitary. Um, so yeah, you could do something like that in order to show how it's being used. Or you can show it next to something that people do understand the size of intrinsically, something like lip eyes or lipstick or brushes or something like that. But again, be mindful not to include too much stuff for the sake of size. You could also just write on your listing what the size of your earrings is. But yeah, then the last thing in terms of presentation is don't be scared of editing your photos. I see that a lot of people, they don't want to edit their photos because they have this misconception that whatever the camera took a photo of, that is what it looks like. But the reality is far from that. You can have something like turquoise, which is nearly impossible to photograph just through your camera, because of the fact that that blue-green combination, it just wants to be either very blue or very green. There's no in between for turquoise. The only way to get turquoise to photograph naturally correctly is to put it next to another bright color, such as fuchsia or a very bright pink or something like that, so that your lens adjusts to the pink rather than the turquoise. So to that effect, feel free to edit your photos, to go and play with the brightness, the shadows, with the red, green, and blue inclusions in your photos. Actually sit with your piece in your hand next to your phone while you're editing your photo so that you can see the difference of what you're seeing on your screen versus what is in your hand, so that you can try and get it as color correct as you can. But at the end of the day, it is also down to your aesthetic. Do you want a highly edited photo? Somebody like, for example, Shop Mal Creates. Her photos is highly edited. Some of them you can barely see the item that's on there because it's so bright, but that's because of her aesthetic. That's what she's choosing to chase. And it's perfectly fine to do that because that is her target market. Her target market is that influencer pretty kind of vibe. And it's perfectly fine to do that. That's her choice. You need to decide for yourself what you want to chase in your Instagram or your Facebook. I'm talking a lot about Instagram because that's my social media of choice. I don't like Facebook a lot. um, Speaking of Instagram, something to be mindful of or careful about is when you see videos or something like that, be very understanding of what they're trying to sell to you. Because a lot of the time you see a video where somebody would have a piece of clay and then they touch it and whoop, it's different. And then they touch it and whoop, it's pieces, and touch it and whoop, it's earrings. And what is extremely misleading about that is that you don't see the work, you don't see the time, you don't see the amount of steps they took in order to reach that point. And it creates this false sense of it's easy. And it is absolutely not. It's very hard, it's time consuming, it's intricate. And I'm not saying this to discourage you, I'm saying this to encourage you, because I can guarantee you, because it happened to me, you see those videos, you try it yourself, it takes you 4 hours to do even just one step of that finger touching, and you ask yourself, what is wrong with me? Am I doing it wrong? It can't possibly be this hard. But the reality is that they cut all of that out. They curated it away from you because they want you to buy into this perfect product that they have, this niceness, the click. They want you to click. So don't fall for it. Don't measure yourself by it. Do you in your own creative space, in your own time. And always try to chase something that makes you happy. It doesn't matter what anybody says about anything. As long as you are happy doing what you're doing, you can never make a mistake. And that just about brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk about. I have a feeling this video is going to be very long. Thank you for sticking through the entire thing if you have. And thank you for bearing with me with learning how to make videos. Because as much as I love teaching and sharing information, I'm also still learning how to do videos, and it takes a lot. So if you have any feedback in terms of how my video is, the framing, any other things I could change, feel free to reach out to me about that. I am working on wanting to put my face in, but I'm not there yet. So until then, you can see my pretty hands. And yeah, that's it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that bell should you feel like it. I'm Gertruida from Etsy Klein, and I really honestly look forward to what you're going to be creating. I'm very excited for your journey. Bye!